From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health. And now here is our host and producer, Hilda Labrada Gore.
Hey, Hilda here. 1 in 36 children in the United States has autism spectrum disorder. These are the official statistics from 2020. Is there no hope to reverse this trend? This is episode 515, and our guest today is Beth Lambert. Beth is an author, documentarian, and the founder of Documenting Hope, a group committed to the prevention and reversal of chronic health and developmental conditions. Did you know that more than half of the children in the United States have at least one diagnosed serious chronic health condition? This is an epidemic of historic proportions, and Beth and her team have been working on this for decades, researching how to best help these children heal from a host of conditions. I'm talking about things like ADHD, anxiety, autism, autoimmune conditions, PANS and PANDAS, sensory processing disorders, learning disorders, and more. Today, Beth shares a groundbreaking result of her work, documented in a peer-reviewed publication about autism reversal in a pair of twin girls. She discusses what approach the parents took, how the girls' Autism Treatment Evaluation Checklist, ATEC scores, dropped over the course of 6 months, and more. Finally, Beth also explains why her findings and her research are indeed giving hope to so many parents who want to see their children's health turned around. Before we get into the conversation, I want to invite you to the next Wise Traditions Conference. It's going to be held in Salt Lake City in Utah. This is the conference that nourishes in every way. It is going to be October 17th to the 19th, and it is our 25th anniversary. So this conference is going to be something really special. So join us. Go to wisetraditions.org to find out how to register and get your hotel and all the things, because we really want to see you there. The food is delicious and Wise Traditions friendly. The talks are phenomenal and mind-blowing, and the people are simply the salt of the earth. So again, go to wisetraditions.org to find out more. We hope to see you there. This is Hilda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Beth.
I'm so happy to be with you all. This is really wonderful.
Speaking of wonderful, we were blown away when we saw that your paper was published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal about these twins whose progress seemed to demonstrate the fact that they were able to overcome their autistic diagnosis. Is that right? Fill us in on the details.
Yeah, so we published a paper in the Journal of Personalized Medicine this past summer, and it's a case report, which is a retrospective look back at a set of twins who had level 3 or severe autism, who underwent in a period of time, it was about 1.5 years, where they did intensive lifestyle and diet modifications. And they also did some very intensive personalized therapeutics. And at the end of this period of time, these twins overcame many of their autism symptoms. One of them completely lost their diagnosis, went from an ATEC score close to 50, which if you know anything about ATEC, the higher the score, the more severe the autism. She went down to a 1. So essentially there is no autism left. And the other one has dropped her ATEC score from the 70s down to, I believe she's in the 20s or 30s right now. But both of them are basically indistinguishable from their neurotypical peers. And this family, we rigorously documented in partnership with them everything that they did in terms of the diet changes they made, in terms of the very specific types of therapies they used, in terms of which doctors they worked with. I mean, really, it was getting every little detail. And the reason why we did that is because, as you were starting to mention, Hilda, that this is something that people aren't really used to hearing, that autism is reversible. And we knew that we would get a lot of pushback on that. I have been documenting cases of autism that have been reversed for over 15 years, and they sit in the realm of anecdote. And so when you go to a parent who gets a new diagnosis, for instance, with their children having autism, they'll say something like, well, I've heard that autism is reversible. And the pediatrician will say, well, no, there's no evidence for that. That's just an anecdote. That's not true. This study proves that that's not the case, that it is reversible. And we are in the process of publishing a second paper about autism reversal with a boy who followed essentially Elaine Gottschall's SCD type diet. But we are really working to gather as many of these kinds of stories as possible, publishing them in the peer review literature so that it becomes impossible for a physician to say, well, there's no evidence that autism is reversible.
So you've thrown around a lot of acronyms, and for those who are uninitiated, I would love for you to elucidate us a little bit more on them. So let's go with the SCD, that diet that you said helped that boy. What does that look like?
So that's a specific carbohydrate diet, and that's essentially changing the types of carbohydrates that are consumed. And the specific carbohydrate diet was developed by a woman named Elaine Gottschall, and she developed for her child that had Crohn's disease, and she had great success with that approach. And specific carbohydrate diet was something that I believe that even Natasha Campbell McBride looked into originally when she was sort of developing her theories about gut and psychology syndrome. So what I will say about all of these diets, whether it's gut and psychology syndrome or SCD, or using even just a Weston and Price form diet, there's many, many pathways to healing and recovery, and it's all bio-individual. This is just, this happens to be one case, the specific carbohydrate diet, what the family chose to use with their child with autism, and it had great success for them. But every person is unique and every person is different. And so there's many, many ways. But all of these diets require that you eat nutrient-dense whole foods and you take out the garbage and all those sorts of things. So
right.
There is so much to be learned or taught just by letting people know that just taking the garbage out, just going for nutrient-dense food is going to make a huge impact on your child.
Wow, that is such good news. And of course, some of us have experienced this in real life, even if we weren't ever diagnosed on the autistic spectrum. When we change our diet to those nutrient-dense foods that have benefited humankind since the beginning of time, we feel a difference, and the brain fog lifts, the headaches go away, and so forth. Not that it's a miracle cure, but that's a great first step, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, the stories that I've been documenting over these years, nutrition is always the cornerstone. It's the foundation. And people will use other things beyond that. For autism in particular, you're talking about a neurodevelopmental condition. So nutrition is only one piece, because for that child to have had a neurodevelopmental condition, that meant that they had neurodevelopment that was interrupted. That meant the developmental trajectory they were on from the prenatal period in utero all the way through to the first 3-4 years of their life, they're doing all this development, this brain development. And what happens is typically that brain development gets stalled, impaired, interrupted. And so while cleaning up the diet, cleaning the cells, detoxification, providing nutrition to the body, that's going to help that child overcome a lot of those symptoms. But sometimes they also need to go back and revisit those developmental milestones and revisit some of those developmental processes. So again, diet is the cornerstone, but it isn't the only thing that can be helpful.
When you say the words developmental milestones, I can't help but think about the fact that I think, is it the American Council on Pediatrics changed and removed crawling as a developmental milestone? Have you heard about that?
Yeah, they moved the goalposts. So yeah, it's the American Academy of Pediatrics, and even the CDC are now using different criteria for determining or defining what is normal childhood development. So what they're doing is they're saying if a child never crawls, that's totally fine and normal. Or if they never roll over from back to front, if they do it later on, it's fine. It's not fine. They're just moving the goalpost because they're trying to normalize developmental delays. And I think that's a very dangerous, slippery slope. We have a lot of grandmothers out there that are like, wait a minute, this isn't normal stuff that these children are going through. My grandchildren are doing different things developmentally. They're talking later, they're crawling later. The grandmothers see it and they know, because they know what a normal developmental trajectory looks like. But if you're a new parent, you may not know that. So you're going to take your advice from the CDC or the American Academy of Pediatrics or your pediatrician, and you're going to hear them say that, oh, it's normal if your child never crawls. Not normal. Common, yes. Normal, no.
Is this kind of the syndrome of everybody on the soccer field gets a trophy? Like, what would possibly possess the American Council on Pediatrics or CDC or others to move these goalposts?
If I were a little bit more nefarious, thinking that there was something more nefarious going on here, I would say that they very well know that some of the things that we do with our infants and our children are causing developmental delays. That could be overuse of antibiotics. It could be excessive vaccination. It could be the back to sleep campaign. It could be any number of these modern things that we do in rearing our children that are actually affecting their development. They may know that and again, move the goalpost to try and normalize it so that everything can stay status quo, that they don't have to question the CDC schedule, that they don't have to question these public health policies that are obviously impairing our children's development. Like that's the nefarious, interpretation. It could also just be well-meaning people who maybe haven't been around for 40 years or 50 years to actually have the long view, to have the historical perspective of what childhood development looks like. And maybe they're naive and maybe they're, just updating the guidelines, being like, oh, people in the past didn't get it right. I don't know what the actual reason is, and it's probably a combination of both. But I do know that this is a huge mistake in moving the developmental goalposts to try and say it's normal for children not to talk until they're 2, or it's normal for children not to walk until they're after 14 or 15 months. That's hurting our children.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to go back to the acronym you were using before, ATEC, which is Autism Treatment Evaluation Checklist. You said that the twins, their numbers went down from, let's say, 76 to 32, or you were saying 50 something to 1. That's like amazing. What are some of the things on that checklist that originally would have been checked? Yes, they have this symptom or this demonstration of a neuro disability, and that got erased.
Yeah, so it would be things like verbalization. So a child's ability to verbalize and to communicate verbally. Other things would be social engagement. A lot of times children with autism, they're described as being in their own world. Sometimes these kids will sit on the ground as toddlers or young children, and they'll fixate on something like spinning wheels or trucks or cars and lining those things up. So those are the kinds of things that the ATEC, the checklist, asks about: sensory defensiveness or sensory sensitivity, or so the sensory symptoms that kids have, their relatability to peers, to their relatability to adults, their inflexibility. Inflexibility is very common in children with autism. So that might mean, for instance, that the child is sitting on the ground and it's time to pick up and move the child into another room. That child can't tolerate that movement, that change. That's an example. And then there's many different criteria on the ATEC checklist. But what you're talking about is these girls had minimal verbal capacity. They were in their own world, not engaging with peers, not playing with toys. And then all of that evaporated where they started playing with peers and speaking and engaging with the parents and with their peers and playing with toys in a typical way, and using their imagination, those kinds of things that maybe they hadn't seen months earlier. So the ATEC is actually something that could be it's largely administered by the parent, and the parent tracks over time. And I oftentimes tell parents who have kids on the spectrum to make sure they do an ATEC, and then at the baseline, when they sort of begin, right, when they get their diagnosis. And then as you do whatever interventions you want to do, whether those are nutrition or therapy or lifestyle interventions or changes, to do the ATEC again so that you can track those changes over time and see the progress that is made.
Well, speaking of the parents, I can only imagine how overjoyed they are right now that their children are functioning in this new way.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. These parents spend some time with them. They're the most incredible, committed parents. They really just decided to roll up their sleeves and do the work that needed to get done for their families. And the thing that was really unique about them, I think, was they were just courageous in the face of opposition. So in other words, they were told they had their children diagnosed at Walter Reed, which is a very reputable institution. So it's not like there was a mistake in the diagnosis. They were diagnosed with level 3 or severe autism. And when they asked about different kinds of interventions that they could do, all they got was ABA. ABA stands for Applied Behavioral Analysis, where there's many critiques about applied behavioral analysis and does it actually do more harm than good for the children? And that's a whole other podcast we could do someday. But these families, when they were told that there's nothing you can do aside from ABA, they didn't take that guidance from their clinicians. They instead kept looking elsewhere and knocking on other doors. And actually, they joined our community. We have an online membership called Healing Together, where we are essentially an online support group for parents who are looking to learn how to do this work And they had joined our group right when we were just beta testing it. We were just beginning, and we got to know them, and we had these opportunities to talk to them about diet and detoxification and all these kinds of things. And these parents they again rolled up their sleeves, and they're like, we're going to change the diet. We're going to detoxify the home. We're going to find all the practitioners that my children need. And they did this in a way that they let their own intuition be the guide. Rather than saying, oh, we need the expert to tell us what to do, they really tuned in to their girls, and they really thought about, what do my girls need? And they went out and found that support for their children, and they made it happen. They did it.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So I read some of the summary of the paper that you submitted, and it said that they used interventions based on dietary changes and environment and lifestyle. So you already talked about nutrient density and the SCD diet, although I guess the SCD diet was related to the other boy who's had his diagnosis reversed. But talk to us about these three things: diet, environment, and lifestyle. And I know you can't get in depth in every little area, but what were some of the changes they made to see these turnarounds in their girls?
So some of it was just, again, focusing on nutrient density and whole foods. That was an important piece in understanding how much that was. Every food that went into their girl's mouth was something that they knew was going to support their bodies, right? Like, I remember one of my mentors and our former scientific director, Dr. Martha Herbert, she used to say that children on the spectrum don't have the ability to tolerate anything that isn't nutrient dense. That body needs every single ounce of nutrition that it can get because it has a lot of repair work to do. So the families really leaned into that and were doing things that would repair the microbiome. So they give their children a lot of fruits and vegetables. They made sure that they were getting things like bone broth, and they were really looking to identify food sensitivities, things that they might have been sensitive to. So that would be, for instance, wheat. There was a sensitivity to wheat and dairy, and they took those kinds of things out while the body was healing, while the body was repairing. But again, it was no junk food, no processed food, none of that. I mean, they just went all in on whole, organic, that was key. Organic foods they know their girls need. And they also supplemented as well. They gave nutritional supplements based on using functional diagnostic tests. So there's different kinds of functional lab tests you can do. There's some of them are based on blood tests, but there's urine and stool tests you can do as well that can actually help guide. You could call it precision medicine. They help guide what kinds of supplements does my child need. You can look for nutrient deficiencies or not enough magnesium on board, or maybe they need some zinc, and they can basically, and folate's another one, the type of folate, making sure it's methylated. That's an important part oftentimes for many kids who have autism, is because they don't have the right kind of B vitamins that are going in. And of course, those are always better to get from food, but sometimes supplements can be used to fill those gaps as well. So that was an important part for them as well, was personalized nutritional supplementation.
Yeah. And what I thought you were going to say earlier is sometimes these kids with these diagnoses on the spectrum are very intolerant to certain textures, or they only want these very familiar foods. And what I've heard Dr. Natasha Campbell-McBride say is, you're the parent, you're in charge, they will not starve, make sure you get these foods in them. So kudos to those parents who overcame all kinds of hurdles to make that happen.
Yeah, and it's repetition, right? So I know Natasha Campbell-McBride used to say this too. And I've heard many people say this, that, you put something on the plate, and if they don't eat it the first time, fine, you put it again. They don't eat it a second time, fine, put it again. You keep putting that food in front of them and introducing it in different ways, and eventually they'll come around. And it's the persistence and the perseverance that really gets the children over the hump. I've seen that with my own children as well. You can't, even if they resist for a week or 2 weeks, you just keep going. You don't let it bother you. You don't want it to be a battle, but it's the persistence and letting the children know that it's going to still be there. Let's keep at it. Let's keep trying it.
Yes. Christine Muldoon, who's on the board of the Weston A. Price Foundation, says your kid needs a number of exposures, maybe like 20 exposures. And it's not always just the food on the plate. It's maybe the preparation or going to the farmer's market and picking it out. Like different exposures to it will eventually win them over. I think you're right. And I wanted to ask you now about environment. What little shifts did the family make, or big shifts, to help their daughters?
Well, there was a lot. I think they generally shifted towards, which is something we always advocate for, but shifting all of the things in their life more to natural as much as possible. So that would mean spending more time outside. So the family definitely made an effort to get outside, get sunlight on the skin without sunscreen, to be outside in nature and surrounded by nature, but also in the home, getting rid of anything in the home environment that might have toxic chemicals in it. So that could be soaps, shampoos, dishwashing detergent, laundry detergent, toothpaste. They did an overhaul on all the things in the home environment to make sure that there wasn't anything that was synthetic. The idea is to get all the synthetics out and get us back as close to nature as possible. So again, that means spending more time in nature whenever possible, using natural light as whenever possible, instead of the LED lights and the halogen lights and the fluorescent lights. It's using things that, the incandescent bulbs, for instance, which are really hard to get.
Mm-hmm.
But again, trying to get as much natural light as possible, fresh air, using an air filter in the home, those kinds of things to try and get all the chemicals out, because we live in a toxic soup in the modern world. There are so many chemicals in and around us in the average American home. Even when we think we're in a pretty clean home, or let's say you buy clean, organic home care products, your sofas were sprayed with flame retardants, and your mattresses probably have flame retardants in them. And it's in every corner of every home that there are innumerable toxic exposures. Yeah. It's an overhaul basically in the home to get as many of those out as possible.
That's literally what I wrote down. I was like, toxic overhaul. I remember when my kids were little and I felt like I was a bad mom because I would let them sleep in their dad's t-shirts when I knew everyone always recommended flame retardant pajamas for your children. I'm so glad that I didn't give in to that. I was just doing the easy thing, but actually it was so much better for them to be in breathable cotton, for goodness sakes, than in something that's been sprayed. And who knows how that would have affected their hormones.
Yeah, I actually remember being the crazy one in my home when people would give my kids these cute, fuzzy, flame retardant pajamas to my kids as gifts. And I would be like, nope. Sorry, those are going out of the house. I wouldn't let them. And I looked crazy. I took that stand on that. But that's the kind of thing we have to do until the rest of the world wakes up to just how much toxic exposure there is in the day-to-day of our lives.
Yeah. And even as you're mentioning these dietary shifts and these environmental shifts, I was thinking how wonderful for any of us to make those choices. I think we kind of don't realize the impact that these, as you were saying, the toxic soup that we're swimming in, even in our homes, is having on our health. So we just think, oh, I have a low-grade headache. I always get a headache this time of day. And we don't stop to think, how is our environment or how is our diet contributing to that?
Yeah, exactly. And the thing that's really wonderful about this family's journey, but truly most families that I've interviewed or talked to who've overcome some kind of chronic health condition with their child, usually mom and dad get better too. Like mom might have eczema and dad might have like rheumatoid arthritis, or, dad's cholesterol is high, not because of what he's eating, but because of the inflammation and the stress in his life. And all that stuff comes back in line when they start doing this as a family. The families who are like, making three different meals for the family probably don't do as well as the family that all goes in together and decides to make these diet changes and make these lifestyle changes together. It's a whole family healing together. And it's really beautiful when a family commits to it and decides to do that.
Coming up, Beth covers additional lifestyle changes that the family of the twin girls made, and that we can also incorporate us to get us back in alignment with our physiology, back to a healthier lifestyle.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
Smidge Supplements. True wellness starts with what you put in your body. That's why at Smidge, they are dedicated to crafting clean, small batch supplements with care and premium ingredients. And this is meant to perfectly complement the real food on your plate. Smidge was founded in response to GAPS and PANDAS families. They needed specific custom supplements that were effective and gentle on their children's sensitive systems. That's why Smidge offers hypoallergenic probiotics tailored to your unique needs and digestive enzymes that support various diets. And they don't stop there. They're 100% food vitamins, real food vitamins, and naturally derived minerals ensure that you're getting the critical nutrients that are tough to obtain even from the healthiest diets. At Smidge, there are no synthetic vitamins, no additives, no common allergens, and absolutely no commercial overprocessing. Just pure essential nutrition. As a transparent, founder-owned and managed company, Smidge is on a mission to change lives by restoring the body's balance and supporting its remarkable ability to heal itself. So start your journey to vibrant health with Smidge. Visit GetSmidge.com. That's GetSmidge.com and use the code WISE10 for 10% off your order today. Again, that's GetSmidge.com. smidge.com, and use the code WISE10 for 10% off your order today. And One Earth Health. Explore the amazing benefits of organ meats with One Earth Health. Did you know that organ meats from New Zealand are 400% more packed with nutrients compared to those from other countries? That means you are getting a lot more vitamin A, K, and the B complex, plus other high-quality nutrients. At One Earth Health, they put these nutrients into easy-to-take capsules. Their cows are raised in pastures without GMOs or pesticides. And what's special about their capsules? They are filler-free. Just pure 100% organ meat. Their prices are the best for organs from New Zealand, by the way. You can get their popular beef organ supplement for just $39.99, and it comes with 200 capsules. So boost your nutrition with One Earth Health now. Go to their website, oneearthhealth.com/wisetraditions, to be taken to a page that will give you a 15% discount. Again, that's oneearthhealth.com/wisetraditions to get to the page to sign up for that 15% discount. This is Hilda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions.
So you mentioned lifestyle a second ago. How is that different from environment? What other changes might they have made that we haven't yet addressed?
So, lifestyle is the big all-encompassing word, right, for describing how we're living in the modern world and how that is out of sync with nature. So an example might be circadian biology and circadian rhythms. So in the modern world, we live with artificial lights and devices and all these kinds of things that we think are normal. This is the type of change you can make very easily by just following the rhythms of nature. So when it is dark outside, we're winding down, we're going to sleep. When it's light outside, we're doing our activity, we're eating within that window when it's light out, as people have done for thousands and thousands of years. So that's kind of the lifestyle stuff. Less screen time, less devices, less artificial light, more sleeping when it's dark out. Those kinds of lifestyle things. Movement is another category of lifestyle. So we are such a sedentary society. The Western world is so sedentary. Mm-hmm. And so just thinking back to basic movements that people would have had 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and people have had for thousands of years. And just having that kind of activity in your life, that is getting, again, in alignment with how our physiology has evolved over millennia. I remember after the twins family had gone through this process with us where we were documenting their recovery story, Mom sent me a video of the girls outside, and they were just playing outside, and they were jumping from, they were like these little logs that like they were just hot sawed off logs, and the girls were jumping from log to log to log outside. And I was like, that is the lifestyle intervention right there. Those kids are playing on logs the way that kids would have played on logs 400 years ago or 500 years ago. That is the natural movement that those kids need, and is helping them to thrive. It was just such a beautiful visual for me to sort of encapsulate, the changes. They're so simple, right? Like there's nothing complex. Yeah. They didn't go for some like fancy $10,000 new technology to like change their brainwave. No, they went outside and played the way that kids have done for time immemorial. And I know it sounds like an oversimplification. These kids didn't recover by just going to play on logs, but it was a mindset shift for this family to do things that they knew was in rhythm and balance with nature.
When you're mentioning jumping from log to log, it makes me think of that video game Frogger. Yeah. And I know, because I've seen it, I have a friend who has a son who's autistic, how much some of these families rely on screens to kind of pacify or engage and communicate with their autistic kids. How did this family deal with screens? Because I feel like that's a modern intervention, and I don't know if it's good or bad or somewhere in between.
I don't know the full picture on screens for them. I know screens were not a major part of their life. I don't know if they went 100% off, but I know that was not a big part of their life. As you mentioned, a lot of families do rely on screens. And the thing is, especially with kids with autism, there is a behavioral component. And the reason there's a behavioral component is usually because there's something about their physiology that's off. It's like, for instance, that the neurotransmitter production is making them have to move in ways that are not what we want to see in an average classroom, for instance. And that is because the microbiota are off in their gut. So there's this whole physiology that's out of balance, yet these kids are asked to sit quietly in a classroom. They're asked to comply with social behaviors that are expected and typical. And the devices do that. right? The devices anesthetize all of us. And that gets compliance, that gets behavioral compliance and conformity, but it doesn't address what are the root causes of their symptoms. It's anesthetizing us by a device.
Yeah, and I can see why that's needed when I look at the autism statistics. So in 2020, they said 1 in 36 children was diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum disorder. And that number has grown steadily over the past 20 years. It used to be, well, you tell me a little bit more about what you know of the numbers.
Yeah. So when I started this work, it was like 2008, 2009. The number was 1 in 150 children had an autism spectrum diagnosis. The best data that we have goes back to 1970, and that was 1 in 10,000. There's some studies that put it at maybe 2 in 10,000, but it was exceedingly rare. And then over the course of the 15 years that I've been involved in this work, we're now at, last year, the CDC put it at 1 in 36 children with autism. But just a few weeks ago, the New England Journal of Medicine published a paper where, with updated numbers, that put it 1 in 33. And I actually think it's higher than that, because a lot of these studies, they don't count for instance, they might do 8 to 12-year-olds. And so they miss the kids who are under 8. So we don't actually have a really good handle on how many kids have autism. But I'll tell you how we do have a good handle on it. Everybody knows somebody. Everybody knows multiple kids with autism. Yet somebody my age, I'm nearly 50 years old, I did not know one child in my elementary school that had autism. And then people will say, well, that's because we didn't call it autism. We called it something else. True. But I also did not have one child in my elementary school that had the stereotypical signs or symptoms of autism. There was no hand flapping. There was no echolalia. There was none of that stereotypical stimming that you see that are observable features of autism. I think there are many people that would acknowledge that as well. Now, there are some people who say, well, I knew, somebody, my brother had autism when I was growing up. And yes, it was there, but it was 1 in 10,000. I assure you, it was 1 in 10,000.
It's such a different landscape now. So this is why your work, Beth, is more important than ever. Tell us more about what future studies hold for documenting hope. And if you're ever going to come out with that movie, or have you? Did I miss it?
Well, no, we have over 100 hours of footage. You're absolutely right. I started out this work trying to document on film what I knew to be true, which was that these kids were reversing their conditions. And it wasn't just autism, it was rheumatoid arthritis and severe eczema, life-threatening food allergies, asthma, ADHD. I mean, I had all these stories of these kids who'd gotten better, and we were capturing some of this on film. So I basically have enough footage to make a documentary film. I just don't have enough money to finish it. So that will happen at some point. We are basically in a place where we're always looking for funding, but we also have a bunch of research studies now, so that we don't just have the stories to tell. We have the science and the evidence behind the stories, and we want those two things to come out simultaneously. So as you know, we just published the one paper. We have a second paper coming out, hopefully at the end of this year, early beginning of next year. This is the SCD case. We have a third paper that we're working on in collaboration with a functional medicine clinic in the Philippines, which is documenting what happens when you use a functional medicine approach for children with autism. And of course, their ATEC scores come down, and we're documenting that. And then we also are looking to fund, we have 2 more retrospective case reports that we want to do on PANS and PANDAS with a Lyme component. So this is a case of PANS and PANDAS, for people who don't know that. It's an autoimmune condition. It's sudden onset. That acronym stands for pediatric acute onset neuropsychiatric syndrome. And the other one is associated with streptococcus, a type of bacteria. These are children that are typically developing, and that maybe around 7, 8 years old, all of a sudden something happens. And these children, basically the parents describe it as go suddenly crazy. They develop what would only be described as psychotic behavior, severe anorexia, tantruming. They have memory loss, bedwetting, regression in all kinds of developmental ways. They have OCD and severe tics. So that these kids all of a sudden develop this behavior that's not characteristic of them. They've never had it before. And it turns out it's inflammation in their brains. And this is diagnosable through various kinds of functional lab tests. Although it really is still a clinical diagnosis, there are all kinds of tests that you can use to identify what's going on with these children physiologically. Now, I've also documented these kids recovering from these conditions. Oftentimes, there's a component where there's an infectious component. It might be one of the Lyme co-infectors, so like Borrelia, Babesia, Ehrlichia, Anaplasma, Mycoplasma. There's all these infections that get into the brain. And then the body tries to regulate that, tries to address those infections. And in doing that, ends up attacking the brain tissue, which causes the inflammation and the behaviors and the things that we see. So that was PANS and PANDAS. We have 2 retrospective cases of kids who've recovered from that we want to publish in the literature. And we're looking for funding to get those published. Again, because when somebody goes in to their doctor with a sudden onset PANS PANDAS, the doctor will, like, first of all, they may not even know what it is. They might put these kids in a psych ward in the hospital because they don't recognize it and don't know what to do with it. And if they do know it's PANS PANDAS, they'll put them on antibiotics after antibiotics after antibiotics, which does not give a good outcome. It's a downward cycle and spiral of health problems because, as you know, antibiotics can be so destructive. So we hope to do more of those kinds of case reports. And then we have a whole other research program that we've been working on for a couple of years that we're continuing to push as well.
So, Beth, do you get your share of naysayers, people who are like, oh, you're giving people false hope? It's not just real hope, it's false hope, because your cases, the stories you're telling of these families, they're the exceptions, not the rule.
Right. We absolutely get naysayers. So when we published the paper on the twins, it was picked up by tons of media outlets. We did not expect this at all. We were kind of like, we have 2 main studies, the CHIRP study and the FLIGHT study, which is our main research platform. And then on the side, we wrote this case report. It was literally something on the side. We did it in the extra hours and nights and weekends, and we collaborated with some people. But when we published it, we did not expect the media went bonkers. So we got tons of people that wanted to interview us for, a lot of it was conservative media, interestingly. And then we also got international press, and our principal investigator was just inundated with emails and phone calls, people wanting to know more about the autism case. A lot of positive, a lot of like, this is terrific. Are there more cases like this? How do we learn from this? But there was also a whole backlash where, for instance, the UK Autism Society, which is an organization that tries to advocate for and promote the rights of people with autism, which I think is a wonderful thing to do. It's a wonderful organization. They found it very insulting and absolutely offensive that we would even talk about reversing autism, because that there is a conception that autism is genetic, it's brain-based, there's nothing you can do about it, and we should accept and embrace the people who have it. And of course, that's true that we should accept and embrace people who have autism and do everything we can to help support them and make their lives as easy as possible and integrate them and make them feel included, but not at the expense of ignoring their medical issues. And that's what happens oftentimes. Like people say, well, if you have autism, we want to include you, but they don't ask about their medical health and their medical symptoms. What happens when you do ask that question? Okay, what are your medical symptoms? Oh, gastrointestinal pain, and I've got chronic diarrhea or chronic constipation, or I've got terrible headaches. And you start addressing those symptoms from a root cause perspective, like changing the microbiome through diet, et cetera. All of a sudden, those symptoms of autism get less severe. Their symptoms of autism start going away. So how do you reconcile those two things? That says, on one hand, somebody with autism has this condition that we must include them and embrace them. But when we address their medical symptoms, all those symptoms that define them go away. That's a very confusing situation for people to deal with. So autism is gotten wrapped up with identity and identity politics, which I think is a little bit of a dangerous slippery slope, because again, while we want to embrace every person's unique individuality and their neurodiversity, we also want to treat their medical issues. And if we happen to resolve some of their features of autism by treating medical issues, we're going to do that. And people will ultimately have less challenges and less suffering.
Yeah, I'm thinking about how anxiety and depression, they're more, I guess I would say, accepted socially, which I think is good. Like, we're talking about it. We're not trying to hide these things. And yet, does that mean we're not trying to alleviate the suffering of that person and address what's at play? Maybe the mental imbalance or the mental anxiety has something to do with what's happening physically in the body, right?
Right, exactly. So I think that's the problem, is that there's been a whole movement of neurodiversity and trying to, again, be as inclusive as possible. That is good and well-intentioned. But when you do not address people's real medical issues because of the inclination to embrace neurodiversity, you're missing the boat on allowing that person to be the best version of themselves. And you're missing the opportunity for them to overcome some of their most challenging symptoms. And I've talked to adults with autism who have started doing the sort of biomedical kind of work for themselves, and they will tell you that I was not happy when I had all of those sensory issues. I couldn't stand being in crowds because of the intensity of the noise and the light. But when they fixed their gut and healed their microbiome, that sensitivity came down. And do you think they wanted it to come back? No, they didn't want it to come back.
I imagine they didn't. All right, I only have two more questions to wrap up with. The first is this. After all these years of working in this space, Beth, what has been a surprising result of the research and studies that you've conducted? Something that you didn't expect and almost just popped out of nowhere, or that really surprised and made you happy at the same time?
What would be a surprising result of all this work? I think if I go back to where I was over 15 years ago, one thing that negatively surprised me has been the resistance. In other words, I came out doe-eyed and a little bit naive at the beginning of this work, being like, you guys, we can heal these kids. We can do it. Look at Natasha Campbell McBride. Look at all these great people out there that have this awesome information. And I published a book in 2010 called The Compromised Generation, thinking that people would be like, high five, let's do this. Let's go. Let's heal all these kids. But the resistance has been very, very, very surprising. I did not expect that. People are really, I think, stuck in the Western medical paradigm that there's a pill for every ill and modern technological science is going to solve this. Whereas I'm like, no, it's get back to the basics, get back to nature. And on the positive side, something that's been surprising to me on the positive side is just how important the role of the parent is, and in particular, the intuition of the parent. That was something I wasn't clued into in the beginning. When I was researching my book, again, that would have been 2008, 2009. I was really into the microbiome and the biochemistry and the tweaking the body to make it get back into balance. But I wasn't really tuned in to the role of the parent and how much the parent played a vital role in that child's outcome. But fast forward 15 years, I think it is the single most important piece of the entire equation is the parent or parents' role. And not only that, but it's their role in using their own internal guidance and their intuition in choosing the interventions that are appropriate for their child. Because if we live in this world where information is just exploding and there's a million different things, should I take antioxidants? Do I need glutathione? Should I take methylated B vitamins? Do I need B12? There's so much information out there. So for the average parent to be able to navigate that when they don't have a PhD, they don't have an MD, they've never been through something like this before, it's a lot to ask that parent. But the parents who are most successful are the ones who just quiet the noise, go inside, and figure out what their gut tells them. Because those are the ones that have had the most profound impact because they listen to that inner guidance and they always know what to do.
Wow, those are really encouraging words here as we start to wrap up. Thank you so much for sharing that, both the hard stuff, but also the good stuff about the parent's role. So now I want to pose to you the question I love to pose at the end. Beth, if the listener could just do one thing to improve their health, what would you recommend that they do?
I think it would be in every choice you have throughout the day. And there's the two choices. There's, this choice or that choice. And whether that's the food you're going to eat in the next minute, whether it's the way you're going to spend the next 5 minutes. If every choice you make is one that says, I'm going to go with the more natural thing. I'm going to go with the thing that my great grandmother might have done. I'm going to go with the thing that sits in ancestral wisdom. That is the way that you sort of move through an increasingly complex world. Is just lean into the natural in all things, whether it's products, whether it's food, whether it's how you're spending your time. That is the one thing that I think shapes the whole healing journey is you just lean into nature. And if you find yourself with symptoms, you find yourself with challenges, you have to sit back and say, all right, how am I living that is different from my great-grandparents? And what can I do to get closer to the way that they lived?
Wonderful. Thank you so much on behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, Beth. We're grateful for your time today.
Of course.
Our guest today was Beth Lambert. Visit her website, documentinghope.com, to learn more. And I am Hilda Labrada-Gore, the host and producer of this podcast on behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation. You can find me at holistichilda.com. And for the transcript for today's episode, visit our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And now for a recent review from Apple Podcasts. Linda Berniak had this to say. She gave us 5 stars. Family Health Bible. a trusted resource of helpful information. If we can't figure it out ourselves, we always go to the Weston A. Price Foundation. Oh my gosh, Linda, thank you for this review. You too can leave us a review. Just go to Apple Podcasts, give us as many stars as you want, tell the world why they should listen or why you love the show. And thank you so much for listening or watching, my friend. Stay well and remember to keep your feet on the ground and your face to the sun.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.